Alrighty then. Good evening, everybody. Today I have with me Robert King, who's our young, bright youth talent in the Cape Youth Front at the moment. And today we are going to be discussing the news about the impending collapse of the ANC, as has been attested by two different from Report and IPSOS. I think we both have our own little suspicions about both of their methodologies, but so far it does look like fairly decent news, all things considered. What would you say?
Well, at first glance, it's definitely good news. I mean, if you look at the Report poll, the ANC is under 40%, the EFF is stagnant, and together they're both under 50%. However, then this Ipsos poll came out, and although at first glance that also seems to tell a similar story, if you look a bit more into the detail, it actually is quite different, considering there's a large segment of that poll which consists of undecided voters, people who aren't going to vote, people who aren't registered. And when you take out a number of those factors from that poll, what you end up seeing is an ANC that's actually very close to having a majority by itself. I think from the data I have, when you remove the unregistered people in the poll and the people who say they're not going to vote, then the ANC number jumps to about 49%. And the EFF's on about 11%. So clearly that's really concerning details. And yeah, so together they'd have a strong majority between them.
Okay. Well, I mean, I have the little thing in front of me from the it's Daily Maverick. So let's just be boomerish and take a million years to get this on the screen. And there we go. All right. So let me just see how this is laid out. Okay. So everyone can see this fairly clearly. So this is what the headline is: ANC's collapse as South Africa's majority parties foretold in a new poll. So Ferial Hafuji, okay, the large and in charge lady at the Daily Maverick, wielding the big headlines. Here we go. This is, I think the first one is from Report. And this says, okay,
poll.
Well, you know, the ANC's at 42. Is the first one the Ipsos poll?
Yes.
Because they've got two graphics here. They've got, see, the second one's Report. You're correct. So the first one is Ipsos. Now, I did some sort of back of the envelope calculation. I know you've done your own, but when I looked at this, there's something wrong about it. I mean, first of all, the DA support is a bit too low. EFF sounds about right. Action SA sounds about right, and so on. But I mean, both the DA and the ANC sounded a bit low. So I thought, okay, well, if we take away all of the percentages down there at the bottom, other parties will not vote, refuse to answer, not registered, don't know. Then what you've got is the remaining 70% of the polling data. And the ANC, I can't remember how much I got out of it, but I think the ANC came up to like 50 or something like that. And then the DA was pushed up to nearly 20, which, it sounds much more realistic.
So on that first
you'll notice in the background my child and her wife there.
So on the first poll, on the Ipsos poll, there were about three ways you could look at that. You could look at that poll. No, it's no problem. So the first one is obviously the way that the Daily Mavericks presented it here. And the second one that I mentioned is if you remove those two bars down there, which is will not vote and not registered, which is about 14% of the people polled. So when you remove that, the DA, I think, goes up to about 13%, and the ANC goes up to about 49%. Then if you remove all the bottom bars below there, above other party mention, that takes you down to about 75%. And from there, that DA goes up to 15% and the ANC goes up to 57%, which obviously those are very bizarre numbers to be looking at, especially considering the general trend of the ANC after election losing seats, as well as the local government election results. So what I did, I found the best way to maybe get an accurate result of the electoral landscape is by looking at both polls that came out, because they actually give both opposite extremes almost, and try and find the midpoint of the data. So if we look at the midpoint of the data for the ANC, that's about 47.5%, which makes somewhat sense because it's slightly higher than the local government election results. But remember, between general elections and local government elections, we tend to see a slight boost to ANC support of up to 5%. So a 2.5% or a 1% increase sounds reasonable. And then obviously 27% for the DA that was in that report poll just seems way too high, especially when you consider the trend in the by-elections for the DA. They haven't made tremendous gains, not enough to increase their vote share by that much. But if you look in between the 15% that was in the Ipsos poll and the 27% that was in the report poll, the midpoint there's about 21%, which was very close to their 2019 election result, and I think is more around the area of realism. And then obviously EFF is pretty stagnant at between 10 and 11% when it comes to their midpoint, and Action SA, you're looking at about 5% for them.
Yeah, I mean, that's none of this is particularly surprising once you've sort of racked the numbers. But I mean, I wonder what the difference is in methodology, because I mean, the differences in outcome are really severe. You've got to wonder whether the report numbers weren't a reader's poll, because the overrepresentation of the DA is quite significant. I mean, one of the general rules we sort of know in South Africa is that when people stop voting for the ANC, they don't go and vote for other parties; they just stop voting.
Yeah, and if you look at if you look at the data there, I think when I looked at the Ipsos polling for the 2021 elections that were published a few days before those elections, the general trend seemed to be the higher the turnout, the higher the ANC vote share, and then the lower the turnout, the lower the ANC vote share. So they had a poll which said that if 26% turnout was at the local government elections, then the ANC would have been reduced to 38%, and the DA would have been on 31%. So that trend definitely seems to be, matched to what you're saying.
Yes. So I mean, the question you really got to ask yourself is how motivated are people right now to engage politically? And I think the answer to that is quite low, which is not great. It might change because I mean, the one of the things that is quite obvious to most people is that 2024 is going to be a big deal of an election, and the possibility of real change occurring is probably going to bring a lot of people out of the woodwork. But I don't know how much that's really going to shift the margins by. It's difficult to estimate. But
2021 was supposed to be 2021 was supposed to be a really important election as well. But if we look at the differences in turnout between the general election of 2019 and the local government elections in 2021, even though you usually see lower turnout at local government elections, the turnout in 2019 was about 66%, and that dropped to about 45% in the 2021 election. So I imagine there will be a rebound when it comes to 2024, but I think we might be looking at turnout below 60%.
Yeah, no, I can't I can't disagree with that. It doesn't seem likely that things are going to change massively. But I mean, look, the one thing that everyone agrees on is that we're definitely going to see a coalition government in 2024. I think everyone can see that. The ANC are definitely going to slip below 50. And I mean, Frans Cronje and his futurologist mystic types over there at the CRA have been, they've been forecasting for, I think, 5 years now. They've been forecasting that the ANC will slip below 50% mark in 2024. So, and that's based on sort of long-term trends in decline of support, mainly because, like in South Africa, like many places, so you don't have, like in most places with a representative democracy system, you don't have these sort of vested perspectives in a two-party binary. What you generally have is people who've got like their own little party that they've been culturally aligned with. And then those parties wax and wane only if there's either a big political upset or if that generation dies off. And so that's what you see in Europe. quite a lot, and indeed the rest of Africa as well. So I mean, a new generation brings a new party system. Although because Europe is so old, you've got these very, very stagnant party cartels. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, I recently discovered this morning while I was doing a bit of research for this sort of, quick Googling for the stream, that an article I submitted like a week ago for BizNews had got published. They didn't let me know it was published. So, I had a look at that, and like the numbers that I used for that are now outdated. But I think it's suffice it to say, I don't think we're going to see the 20-point sort of shift that would be needed to give the DA the option of forming a coalition with all the anti-charterist parties. That's the table. And I mean, that being off the table means, the options really are whoever gets into bed with the ANC. And there's some people who say, oh, no, the EFF are going to kick the ANC out because they really hate the ANC. And I am sort of skeptical about this. I don't know about you. Richard Wilkinson offered a very interesting theory. Go on.
I don't agree that the EFF will, I think, ally with the opposition. I think maybe they're using these coalitions that they've currently got at the municipal level, maybe as leverage to try and threaten the DA into a coalition at the national level to prove that they've done coalitions with the opposition in the past. It's not completely unfeasible that they would do it at a national level, but I think they're using that as leverage to try and force the ANC in 2024 to accept many more of their demands.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, Richard Wilkinson offered a very interesting theory. So he sort of synthesized the two, and he said, well, what he thinks might happen is that the EFF kicks the ANC out of government and lets them sort of wither in the wilderness for a while, and then breaks the coalition deal and reforms with the ANC, just so that they can get a taste of sort of being cleft from the herd and left to die in the wilderness for a bit. And that could mean some extreme instability. So I think, Helen Zille's picked up on this a lot. It's kind of been a main theme of a lot of the recent articles that she's put out, is saying that coalitions are going to be unstable. You can't trust these smaller parties. They don't have good values, and they make or break coalitions based on, small petty interests, horse trading, corruption, and so on. And so they've really lambasted all of these parties, like really aggressively. It's not just Helen Zille, but she's the main sort of purveyor of this narrative. The small parties can't be trusted. And the problem with that is that they're current coalition partners in all the big cities. And for me, I mean, I don't see that as a great strategy. I mean, look, part of it is true. Part of what she says is true. And that's definitely that when people vote for the small parties, it's not because they're breaking away from the ANC, it's because they don't feel like the DA are good enough. Most of the time. So I think she does have a point there. But I think that, the DA has a natural ceiling. And part of that is due to the progressive commentators have a big point here, which is that black people aren't going to vote for a white liberal party. They're not. I mean, you'll get to a certain threshold and then it'll bounce back down again. I think Nelson Mandela Bay is most instructive. So what happened in Nelson Mandela Bay, and I wrote an article about this, is that they got into coalition, actually outperformed the ANC. They got 46%, the ANC got 39%. And so they get in the government, they form a coalition with a couple of small parties, right? And during this time, the ANC bleeds the coffers dry because they realized they weren't in power anymore, so they couldn't rob with tenders. So what they did is they used their cadres that they deployed to the legal department, and they do amendments of existing evergreen contracts, and they use that to bleed the coffers dry. And at the same time, they went out and they sabotaged public infrastructure, like sent unions and thugs and whatever to break down water pipes, roads, electrical lines, everything. It was relentless. And the speaker disrupted everything, and constant chaos. And then the UDM fellow crossed Bobani, I think he crossed over to the other side. And coalition government collapses. Next time they're elected, the ANC hasn't changed. They were static at 39, but the DA went down to 39 with them as well. And I think this kind of thing is indicative of what you can, and that's for small stakes. Remember, that's for PE. That's for Gqeberha. It's a tiny manufacturing hub, a tiny little port city, but the stakes at a national level are extraordinary. So I don't think they're going to be quite as relaxed in how they tackle that problem if they come up to in the national. And so I don't think the DA's really got what it takes to pull off, even if they did have enough votes to cobble together an anti-charterist coalition. I don't think they could do it. However, there's one option. Look, some people don't believe me on this when I tell them. So I'm going to put together. I'm going to share the screen again, and I'm going to show there's a little thing where Helen Zille was on Biz News for a conference. She was explaining their strategy for 24, and where are we? It is this one.
I've actually got a series of Helen Zille tweets in the tab here.
Oh yeah, we'll check them in a minute.
For the realignment of politics in South Africa, and this is where I'm going to draw you a picture, and I hope you can all see what I'm going to draw. It's going to be up on the screen. I arranged this with Biz News. Nothing's too much for them. They said they would actually do it on the screen. It might be too much for me to draw a triangle, but there it is. That is the triangle that I drew at the time. And I said, everybody, this is our moment, and we have to understand the moment, and we have to understand how the forces of politics are shaping South Africa. And so I'll put the EFF in this corner, because in the first election that they fought in 2014, they got 6%. And that's the EFF. You can see it's red. There I have the DA. Back then, 22%. Pretty much what we got now. I'll make it a bit bigger for obvious reasons. But in this little corner are a whole lot of smaller parties, the Freedom Front Plus, the UDM, the ACDP, the Carter Freedom Party, now also Herman Mashaba, in that corner that I think mostly incline more to us. And I said, now we have a clear contest in South Africa. The DA versus the EFF. That is the fight for South Africa's soul. That is the battle for the future. Here is the ANC. The ANC is this huge mass in the middle. But even in the 1980s, and certainly in the 2000s, or the noughties as they call it, and even now, most especially now, no one can tell you what the ANC stands for. The DA stands for constitutionalism, the rule of law, accountability, non-racialism, which has become a swear word in South Africa today, and a range of other things like separation of all the factors that make for a successful constitutional democracy. The EFF stands for the dead opposite. They stand for a system in which the leader controls the party, and the party controls the state, and the state controls the economy. The recipe for totalitarianism. That's where they stand. And that is the choice, real choice for South Africa. And the critical thing that has to happen in politics is that this huge dominant mass, the single party dominant mass, has to come apart so that people can go where they need to go in terms of the principles and values they stand for, so that the contestation for South Africa's future can become clear and can become real in people's minds. We now have to go to be a party of government so that we can live out those values, demonstrate those values in action, and show that they work better than this or the inchoate mass that is there. And so we won Cape Town back in 2006.
Okay, I'm just going to pause that over there because, I mean, we don't need to go into the history of the Western coalition unless we have to. But what I see over there is she's saying, okay, well, the ANC has to kind of one factions has to side with the DA, and one of the factions has to side with the EFF. And what she's really describing is picking an internal faction and forming a government coalition with him. Now, she tries to avoid stating this explicitly throughout the videos. But I can't see any other way you can interpret her strategy. Because unless she is talking about physically breaking apart the ANC, which is never going to happen. I mean, everyone knows it's impossible. But everyone knows that what is possible is for one faction to overtake the other, because that happens every so often. That happened with each successive leader. And I mean, okay, fairly violently, but it happens. And Cyril Ramaphosa was picked by international investors, so they dumped billions of rands into his internal ANC campaign, and they splashed his in order to get attention from the further international investors. They had him endorsed by the Economist, who had never defended a National Socialist candidate before. Sorry, I shouldn't use that term so glibly, but he's a black nationalist and he's a socialist. So, but
a socialist nationalist.
It's supposedly a sort of a Keynesian liberal sort of publication. Yeah, socialist nationalist. Let's go that way, because it's race nationalism with socialist economics. But they endorsed him nonetheless, and they actually, in the article they wrote, they encouraged anyone reading that paper to vote ANC instead of DA, because they wanted the ANC to have a very clear mandate to tackle corruption. So what we're dealing with here is an extreme naivete. I mean, more money has been stolen under Ramaphosa than under Zuma, and everyone knows that. I mean, it's absolutely stratospheric. The way that they one of sort of ingenious methods for facilitating this feeding frenzy that he offered his fellows is that he changed the sort of the public contract regulation and the public procurement regulations under the Disaster Act. And so basically everyone just bled the entire, like the coffers dry. And it was like, the ANC and the state are like on the verge of bankruptcy. So we've had some rather unpleasant sort of after that. And I think, the international investment community is sick of Ramaphosa, and the voters have caught up and are sick of Ramaphosa, and the white liberals have even sort of gotten frustrated with him. And I think the nail in the coffin, for everyone, quite obviously, let's not sort of fail to deal with all of the obvious dimensions, is Phala Phala. I mean, I don't know about the people you hang out with, but everyone I've talked to who they hear about Phala Phala and they're like, oh yeah, like specialness about Ramaphosa is gone, like he's laundering money and so on. So it's really changed, and the Zuma guys feel really energized right now, and they've got a number of candidates out there, and the so-called Ramaphosa's faction, they don't seem so strong. They haven't got a lot of candidates. So, I don't know what you're seeing there, but I'm not seeing a very vibrant possibility for the modeling of the ANC to form a coalition with anybody.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard to identify what's going to happen there. And I mean, especially if you look at the poll results, if you take those into consideration, I mean, from those poll results, there isn't really any clear coalition that's at least being publicly discussed that could form from that. I mean, you've got the ANC and EFF on 48%. I think you can call it the multi-party coalition of, Action SA, DA, Freedom Front Plus, IFP, ACDP, on about 42, 43%. So from that, actually, in many ways, that's probably one of the most chaotic results we could get from an election is when, at least with an ANC EFF coalition, you've at least got the some sort of stability because they've at least got a majority together between the two. With this result, you don't even have a majority between those two parties, and I think that could actually be a far
and they also
dangerous outcome.
share a vision.
Yeah, I think that could be a far more dangerous outcome, actually, at the end of the day, if they don't even have a majority, but the multi-party, the anti-charterist coalition doesn't have a majority themselves. And then obviously these minor parties come into play then. And then obviously we've seen Nelson Mandela Bay. It's actually quite a strange coalition that's forming there because you've got parties like the Pan-Africanist Congress allying with the DA to vote out the ANC. Now, I don't think that's going to last too long. Especially some of these parties that constantly backstab.
No, it's a temporary move.
Partner, like the UDM, going with the DA, the ANC, DA again. They're going to go back to the ANC at some point. So yeah, it's absolutely crazy. And Helen Zille, when it comes to coalitions for the ANC, she's always been very careful with her words when it comes to doing this coalition. So at first, they tried to sanitize, Ramaphosa and just blame it all on the cabinet. We saw that with the motion of no confidence. They publicly stated we don't want to get rid of Ramaphosa because we don't want the RET to come in, but we want to get rid of that cabinet. And then after the State of the Nation address that he gave, Helen Zille and was praising him on Twitter, describing it as like a wonderful speech. And then obviously she had that interaction with you a few months ago when you were doing your live stream about the possibility of an ANC-DA coalition. And there were two tweets that she came out with, which were quite telling. One of them was the ANC is unsalvageable, which is quite a clear message. There's no uncertainty about that. But then the following tweet from her was, we won't do a deal with the ANC in its current format, which is obviously a massive clarification, saying in its current format, which suggests that, if something changes, if the, Ramaphosa faction takes over, then the format changes, and then there's a possibility of a coalition there. And then obviously Fala, at least from the public's point of view, changed things a bit because she then came out and sort of admitted to lying by saying that she'd be honest. She was hoping that there could be a coalition arrangement or some sort of working arrangement to form a new government. But now she's totally convinced that there won't be a government. The entire ANC is completely corrupt. So, there's no idea. I have no idea what the DA is going to do if it gets to a situation where they've got the opportunity to go into coalition with the ANC. They've been all over the place when it comes to their public comments on this. And I think it's concerning because, as you've written, an ANC-DA coalition would be a very bad result, not just for, I think the DA itself, but for the country, and in particular, in my situation, the Cape as well.
Yeah, I don't understand what the next play is from them. But let's say Ramaphosa stays on. Let's say he actually manages to secure the ANC leadership contest this year, which is a big if, because the way his reputation has been damaged now. He is no longer Mr. Clean, and there's any different. Look, no one in ANC is Mr. Clean, but they can appeal by saying, "Look, we can give you more goodies, and we can be more radical, and we are going to be more pro-black or what have you." And so that populist message, that is probably going to be more potent. And we've already seen, so in the KZN ANC, they have gone balls to the wall and kicked out all the Tumamina people, and they're full RET. They are very, very serious. So I think I think what we're going to expect is that, look, KZN is the kingmaker province. Whoever they pick becomes the leader. It has been like this for a long time, and I think I don't see it being I don't see it being I just don't. I think there's a bit of schmutz on my camera because it's
And also, just going back to the election results as well. I mean, KZN is obviously one of those provinces that everyone's looking at the national level, because along with Gauteng, it's one of those places where people are optimistic that an anti-ANC coalition can form. But actually, if you look at the polling results, even from 2021, the election results, it was, I think the ANC and EFF had a majority in that province. So if they get a slight boost in between now and the next election, just from that natural boost you get after the local government elections and general election, I think that the likelihood that you get an ANC EFF coalition is quite likely. Although obviously it depends on a variety of factors that happen at the ANC's internal politics in that province. But it is a really disturbing position the country's in when the Kingmaker province, the ruling party in the Kingmaker province, has been taken over by a faction called the Taliban. So it's a disturbing position to be in.
Well, I mean, you're making me think now. I mean, the real common factor over there, when you're saying, okay, they call themselves the Taliban, it doesn't mean they're Muslim. None of them have interest in Islam. It's really because they're anti-Western. So America's the beating heart of the West right now. Very sort of sickly and sclerotic heart, but beating nonetheless. And the defeat of the United States in Afghanistan has been an enormous sort of bellwether for the coming decades. And one of the more interesting things that happened, and I think this gets kind of forgotten sometimes, is when Russia invaded Ukraine, the ANC released their official stance, which is neutrality, which it's the right decision. I'm for international neutrality. I don't like picking sides and playing grand politics. We're a small nation. We don't belong in that kind of game. However, the ANC then did the following. They went with all of their leaders to the Russian embassy and held a massive cocktail party to celebrate the fall of the Western imperial globalist regime. Which, I mean, I can understand the Schadenfreude, but it's...
the right answer. Well, they're sort of coming to the right answer because, but through the wrong way. I mean, obviously there's a reason for being neutral in the sense that, if you're a small country with, dependence on both, you want to try and balance those two pressures. But the ANC, they're taking a neutral position because they're anti-Western purely. But obviously they can't go completely pro-Russia because then the United States will, place sanctions or punish them economically. So, they're coming to the right answer through the wrong equation.
I mean, this is the thing is from what I've heard, actually, the American ambassador was actually fairly soft on it because I think he knows that South Africa's export market is mostly in Western Europe, and Western Europe are much more toothy as regards Ukraine than even the United States is. They've gone kind of slightly deranged about the matter and have decided to commit economic
because
suicide.
They're going to freeze to death over it.
Right. Well, I mean, Germany is having flipping South African style load shedding right now, which is
the UK is also going to be looking at the same. They came out with an article in the BBC, or it was Bloomberg, and they said that in January they might have to have scheduled blackouts that affect industrial areas and might even impact residential areas when it comes to January. But you notice this,
the Europeans are the fucking same. They are nuts because if you are having load shedding and you're South Africa, you're going to be very practical. You're going to say, okay, sorry, residential areas, you're going to have to take a hit because the economy is very important. We're going to keep the industry online. Okay, that makes sense. What do the Europeans do? They say, oh, shit, well, we don't want to actually touch any sort of voter feelings on the factories. I mean, these people are off their rocker.
Well, possibly the difference might be that because during a winter, I mean, obviously the European population is incredibly elderly, and if you've got quite a nasty winter and you're turning off energy to elderly people's houses, then a lot of them might end up dying from that.
No. Look, that's fair enough. However, it isn't winter yet, and the Germans have already doing that, shutting down industrial areas because I mean they were hit first. And as far as I'm concerned, that's kind of nuts. I mean, look, I understand if it's necessary, winter coming, you're going to be snowed in. Okay. However, I mean, the other thing is that it's also Europe. You've got to remember the infrastructure is different. So it's not like they do the heating with electricity. They do the heating with gas. So they could ration gas and cut off gas to industrial areas, but cutting off electricity to industrial areas seems to me a really, really poor option, because you can keep the heating infrastructure on while turning off the electric infrastructure, and you can keep the economy humming. But what they're doing, it's just not good prioritization, from what I can tell. I mean, I might be wrong. Or someone who's engineering, sort of civil engineering expert, will probably, thrash me for not knowing what the hell I'm talking about. But from what I can see, that's what it looks like. But yeah, so I mean, we've gotten ourselves into a situation where
things more. So because you might get, for example, the media, presenting it as if, oh yeah, we're sacrificing the population in order to support the greedy capitalists. That's who we're giving electricity to, rather. So there's also that factor, and I don't think that same media sensationalism really has the same. It does have an impact, but I don't think it's the same impact in South Africa.
Yeah, I think people often forget how much more sophisticated Western propaganda is. I know that's sort of a crude way to talk about it, but strictly speaking, the way that people push agendas in the news, they're far more sophisticated than we are down here in South Africa. I mean, the narrative control is profound. And if they've got something very serious and there's an international agenda they need people to get behind, every single newspaper will make sure to publish the same stories and have the same spin on it. And they're free to sort of publish whatever they like on some issues. But generally speaking, they've got this extremely finely coordinated global information system. I mean, there's the Trusted News Initiative. That's all the major international news media and social media subscribe to that organism, and it sets the editorial policy for all English-speaking media on the planet. And it's a very rare operation that bucks the trend. And I think Rupert Murdoch's guys they've been mavericks for a while, and they're sort of blunt populists. So occasionally they do funny things and go off on their own. Really speaking, even they will get behind sort of big major meta narratives when it's crisis time. So yeah, no, it's very different from over here. I mean, look, over here we've got like 3 or 4 big owners of the news companies here. But then, I mean, one of the biggest owners is actually the Public Investment Corporation, state ownership. So, I mean, like you'll get a certain kind of slant in a lot of articles, and everyone's got an idea of what kind of stuff is not allowed. But we don't have that kind of coordinated. The only time we really saw anything like it was with COVID. And that's largely because we sort of if it's an international thing, everyone just looks, oh, what are the Americans doing? What are the Europeans doing? And they don't really think very hard about it. So we're not a big critical thinking. Yes, Colors for Cape Independence in the comments has pointed out counterexamples: Sky News, Fox News, Daily Mail, Telegram. As I said, that is Rupert Murdoch's property, and he is the one who is happy to sort of play fast and loose. But again, when you've got everyone else on the other side and they've got this one little sort of these plebeian populists in one corner, they can say, ooh, look how Rupert Murdoch is playing with ratings. He's just sort of
and I think there's a difference between
the racists.
I think there's a difference between Europe and Europe, the Anglosphere, and America in particular. I mean, obviously the American media is highly partisan in the way, at least they portray themselves. And then obviously in Europe, we see there's broadly the media is broadly more left wing, and obviously, but they try and hide that left wing bias as being balanced and neutral. That's how they try and hide it. And then even in the UK, I mean, the media is especially the broadcast media is especially to the left of centre, with the one exception of GB News, I would say. And then Australia is a different story as well. I think
but GB News, their main guy, but GB News, GB News is not right wing. I mean, their main guy, Tom Harwood's a communist. I mean, by any measure, he's a communist.
Well, it's look, they've got a variety of voices. I mean, obviously, the UK's position of conservatism is different to other countries.
I don't think so.
I mean, they've got people like Tom Harwood.
I think GB News is an example of something called containment. So what they do is they repackage left-wing ideas that are like 2 or 3 years old, as now a right-wing sensible option. And it's quite nuts. So what they do is they make sure that
I wouldn't say the same with GB News. Like certainly some of their columnists are like that, but I mean they've got people like Mark Stein as well, who's the only person in the UK at the moment who's talking about deaths from a particular medical product. He's the only person bringing attention on the UK broadcast media.
Is he the long-haired Scottish fellow who talks like he's telling you you've done a naughty thing all the time?
I think he's like a Canadian. I think he's a Canadian. He was on Fox News a lot a few years ago.
Okay, well then
on Tucker's show, but now he's got his own show.
Oh, right. Okay.
He's got his own show on GB News. And then there's Farage, and then there are some voices there that I would say do take, at least compared with the rest of the UK media, quite a conservative position. Obviously, UK conservative standards are different to other countries, but I mean, it definitely is, a fresh voice in that media landscape there.
Yeah, well, thank heaven for small
it's pretty much on 24/7 in my house.
Where were we? We went to tangent. Oh, yes. The ANC. Yes. The ANC and their relation to the West. I mean, I think there's a little side note over there that I found interesting, which is the Germans and green energy. While we were on the whole energy topic, I remembered this. So there's a bit of a conspiracy going on at the moment. So I don't know how coordinated this is, but it would be surprising if it wasn't to some degree. The Nozipo and Chloe, yes, that's correct. What's it called? Mail and Guardian is funded by Soros. I can't remember. One between Mail and Guardian and Daily Maverick. One is funded by Gates and one is funded by Soros. I can't remember which is which. But I think the thing is that the Amo Bongani guys, they're sort of old-fashioned English social democrat types. So they're naturally going to look at George Soros and see what a wonderful, kind-hearted, philanthropic man giving his billions away to charity and social action. I mean, they don't really understand what he's done at all. I don't think, because when I read them, they're very sort of apolitical in the way that they write. And I mean, me as someone who's fairly hard on the conservative side, even I look at them and I go, okay, well, I can see that they're left wing, but basically all they do is report on corruption. They don't do any deep analysis on political systems or anything. So that's really all they do. And I mean, Sam Soul, who runs Amo Bongani, is one of the few really principled journalists in the country. And I say that despite the fact that I don't think the two of us would come onto the same page about any political issue. But I can say that guy's solid. And what it is, he used to be do opinion writing and sort of all those analysis pages, but now it's just straight reporting on corruption and things, because that's how you keep your head down and make sure you can do good journalistic work without stepping on people's toes. And because I mean, one of the last things that he published in 2010 was something called, you can Google this, it's called brown envelope journalism. And he talks about how most of the people in South African media, and the editors too, are just for pay. I mean, they write what they're paid to write by whoever comes up to their door and drops an envelope in their pockets. And I mean, this goes for pretty much everyone, he says. There's almost nobody who isn't like this. And that was sort of his farewell to journalism before he moved over to like the very dry, straight up stuff. And so, I mean, we've got a very seedy and corrupt sort of media landscape. But back to the topic of German conspiracies. I don't know if you picked up on this, Robert, but there was a thing a while back. Now, I was accosted on Twitter by some left winger who was saying that Germany was trying to steal our coal. And I didn't believe it at all, but it turns out they're right. And what they've been doing for the past couple of decades is the German Green Party, which is part of the ruling coalition. They're the ones that are most aligned with American foreign policy, which makes a lot of people suspect CIA connections. But anyhow, So the German Green Party have been financing through the Heinrich Böll Stiftung, which is their little in-house think tank. They've been financing an organization called Earth-Life Africa. And Earth-Life Africa has made it their principal mission to sue the government anytime it tries to build a coal-fired power station, or, in fact, a nuclear power station, and pick them to death over the environmental impact reports. Because no one else would do this, but they're willing to pour money into this effort. And they've been fairly successful. They've shut down a number of them. The only one which they didn't manage to stop was the special economic area that the ANC have designated for the Chinese to do mineral extraction up in Limpopo. So we're building the Chinese a nice big fat power station with some nice infrastructure and everything. And anyhow,
it's sort of the neocolonialism that people don't talk about, because I mean it's incredibly hypocritical, especially when you consider that this environmentalist party in the German coalition, because of the situation with Russia now, I think they're overseeing the reintroduction of coal production in Germany, coal-powered power stations, and I think they've even been discussing, even though they were one of the loudest proponents of getting rid of nuclear, I think they've even been discussing reintroducing nuclear into the German energy grid. So I mean, it's absolutely hypocrisy. It's keeping the West, the power on in the West, while allowing Africa and South Africa in particular to suffer.
Well, I mean, here's the thing: it's a zero-sum market when you're talking about carbon credits, because carbon credits means, well, if I consume more carbon, someone else has got to consume less. And so the way that the Germans have done this is that they there's COP26, which was recently, they made a deal with South Africa. They got a couple of other countries to contribute, and they gave us a loan, which if we don't pay, they'll seize public infrastructure from us. They gave us a loan of $8.5 billion US dollars, and in exchange we're supposed to shut down 4 coal-fired power plants. Now, I don't know if Ramaphosa was being cute with them, but we do have 3 that were already scheduled to shut down within that window. However, the point remains that they have come and said, you are going to shut down your power sort of supply, and we are going to purchase your coal, which is the bit that they didn't say out loud. So since the beginning of the Donbass war, South Africa's exports to Germany in coal, they have increased their share of our market from 4% to 15%. I mean, that's more than triple what they were before. So, I mean, we can sort of see the sleight of hand here. It's quite clear. And I mean, what I sort of wonder when I'm looking at how the DA deals with foreign powers, I don't think they're going to be any more transparent. I mean, the whole thing that Alan Winde organized with Wesgro and the bank companies. So it was Google, Facebook, and Amazon were to put down big offices in Cape Town. Oh, you're going to provide lots of jobs. Although I have my doubts about that kind of stuff. What happens is that, I mean, those become talent poaching vehicles, and the people will work here for like a little while, and then they'll be, if they're good, they'll be sent overseas, and they'll be replaced by some foreigner that they're shipping here. But aside from that, it gives them a foothold, and allows them to threaten and manipulate and bribe and cajole local governments to sort of get further concessions. And I mean, people look at the Amazon building that was thwarted by a bunch of environmental activists and English hippies and stuff. That Amazon thing was, it was just a data center, people say, but it's got two sort of angles on this that I really, all of those FANG companies are actually part of something called the Enduring Security Framework, which is a mechanism that is, all of these companies have permanent contracts with the CIA, and they have to cooperate with CIA sort of foreign projects. Like the Arab Spring was one of those big ones. They used Twitter to boost and deboost various signals in order to help manipulate the media landscape in the Middle East. And I think the thing is that the data centers actually, the thing is that that's actually the contractual nexus with Amazon and the CIA, because that was their first actual major tender deal was that is where the CIA stores their data. And if the CIA stores their data, you'd better believe that they're going to be monitoring your service, which means, okay, now we're going to be running all of our data, or at least a significant part of our data is going to be going through, servers monitored directly by the CIA. Not that they can't monitor other things through other means, but it sort of makes it easier for them. And I look at that and I also think now they're providing however many thousand jobs, even if it's like 3,000 or 4,000. Then anytime, the local thing that they want to do, then they say, well, I think we're going to pull all of our companies out, friend. So maybe get on. And like that kind of thing where you give especially foreign companies the kind of clout that allows them to consume more and more of your local market. I just don't like that. I mean, there's a reasonable way to engage with them. And the people who are a bit too powerful, I don't want to give them too much. So that's kind of my instinct with those kind of things. But I mean, it was like a special trade deal that was made with the DA in the Western Cape with the United States. And, I can understand why they did this. But on the other hand, I think that it might have been slightly naive. It's not like we got Americans to build a factory here. It's not like we got them to build sort of any like assembly plants or anything like that. So, you know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. Look, I think that obviously that ignores the fact as well the concerns that local indigenous groups had around about those companies moving their headquarters here as well. How once again their opinions on the matter were largely disregarded in order to facilitate this happening. And I think there's not a national security threat, but certainly an economic threat, I would say. Obviously, allowing companies like Amazon to take up a large share of our market. They've got an immense amounts of resources, far more than any of our local companies have that operate in the e-commerce sector. So, they could easily use their resources to try and crush or buy out all the other local competitors in the area. And then you're really left with a monopoly situation, which is, not ideal from a commerce point of view. Not only do we have, already a weak and unstable economy, but then we're, giving control of that weak and unstable economy over to the United States. So there's definitely a big economic concern from my point of view from that.
Yeah, because I mean, those sort of multinational giants can absorb any kind of instability. So they can look at the fluctuations in your market and say, yeah, well, we're just going to keep on continuing. And then as your market weakens, they can just buy up all the little competitors locally. So I mean, because they're willing to play very dirty. I mean, Amazon is traditionally known for making their prices, like well below market value, just in order to destroy whatever tiny niche competition in the market. Like they've done this to companies that sell nappies. It's like very niche, and they're willing to go to any lengths to make sure that they have an absolute majority, and they're publicly funded. Their entire growth is publicly funded. They haven't been making. They didn't make any profits until quite recently, and it's sort of only once you've achieved this, and it's been overseen by American sort of government. So it's for me, it's slightly sinister, and I don't really like it. But I mean, before we get bogged down on this international commerce nonsense too long, because I think we've been, as exciting as it is to talk about, there's still one item I want to deal with regarding the coalition government in 2024. And that is our dark horse candidate, Mogoeng. So let me see if I can just, I'm going to share screen again. And
I do remember we've got Cape Independence
this fellow called
talk about as well.
Who's oh, yes. Well, the Cape Independence will come up. But the last candidate on the ballot here is Bocho Kaas. Well, no, he's not the candidate, but he's talking about it. So we get this little video with Mogoeng doing one of those awkward old Tswana men infinite handshakes. I don't know if you've ever hung out with Tswana guys from the older generation or out in the countryside, because you start shaking the guy's hand and he does not let go of it for 15 minutes. So so he has Mogoeng having this handshake with one of his colleagues, the goes through the whole 2-minute video where he announces he's going to run for president, which you don't need to see because the sound is so awful. I couldn't hear it with good earphones. And so then, well, I mean, I could hear it a little bit, but it's terrible. Anyhow, so what we got here, let me just zoom in a wee bitty so we can have a good read. So, and I mean, some of this is rumor and hasn't been verified, but let's just take it at face value for the time being, just for the sake of argument. So this is Mogoeng approach for the 2024 presidency candidates. A group of 1,600 African religious leaders, including some leaders of the largest churches, have been meeting with 400 Magoshi, or tribal chiefs, for over 6 months, discussing challenges faced by South Africa under ANC administration. It's reported that they sent a delegation of 25 religious and tribal leaders to engage ANC and demanded the ANC was founded by religious, tribal leaders and African academics, be reconstituted alongside Congress principles focused on the battle for land, Ubuntu, and African morality. See, it is alleged that an ANC delegation led by the ANC chairperson Gwede Mantashe did not show interest in the subject, and the party's discussions collapsed, having met at least 3 times. African leaders were demanding that the ANC approach President Ramaphosa to immediately resign and the constitution of the republic be amended so as to recognize the battle for the land to be given back to the owners under the administration and leadership of Magoshi and tribal authorities, including the Khoisan leaders. They also demanded the full recognition of the African-led churches to be above those of the colonizers and their missionaries. The other delegation met with Gayton McKenzie and Julius Malema, seeking that the two reconcile and avail their organizations to be part of a future African leaders and organizations coalition government. It is alleged that progress was registered in this instance. Some of the parties engaged with include the PAC, AZAPO, the ATM, and the COPE. With the ANC having rejected the offer to lead the African coalition, the Chief Justice Mogoeng was approached, and he is rumored to have accepted to be the presidential candidate of the new formation. Chief Justice, it is rumored, is in consultation with various African academics to avail themselves to join the new formation. It's also rumored that he is recruiting young African leaders out of the DA with the help of Musi Maimane. The new formation is rumored to be in talks with General Bantu Holomisa, Herman Mashaba, and the Inkatha Freedom Party. So, yeah, we are looking at quite the coalition.
It's quite the look. Obviously, I think it's still largely rumor. I don't think this has necessarily been confirmed. Obviously, the fact that he's running has been confirmed, but these additional details have not. I'd be skeptical about some of these coalitions.
Yeah, I think his party is now called the African Alliance Movement. Yes, the African Alliance Movement. And I thought about this, and so I tweeted this out. It is certainly possible that he's going to be an also-ran. I mean, so many new parties have come and gone. I mean, there's another interesting candidate out there, in which I call the World Economic Forum Party, which is a new thing that's been put together by Songaso Zibi and Lindiwe Mazibuko, who's head of the World Economic Forum's little recruitment body down here in South Africa. And they want to push sort of like ANC, but with majoritarian racial discrimination and stuff. DA with ANC, sort of like DA liberalism with ANC's race policies, sort of. Anyhow, but Mogoeng's little thing.
Centralization as well.
Yeah, centralization. Oh, yeah. The one thing that everyone seems to agree on in all of the new parties, like, you know, Action SA, Mogoeng's group, and this new World Economic Forum vehicle, the thing that they all seem to agree on is that the provinces should be abolished. That I find interesting. So
that's if you look at the polls as well, then if you're very pro devolution or federalism or independence, then actually the poll, at least from Report, was not a good poll for you, or either poll really, because both give majorities to pro-centralization parties. You've got the EFF, Action SA, ANC easily having a strong majority in these polls. So even if a coalition were to form with the DA leading it, and the DA promised to do federalism and all these nice things, they probably wouldn't be able to get it through Parliament.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's very clear. But the one of the things that people forget, and you hear it in the way Helen Zille talks about, rule of law, constitutionalism. Now, constitutionalism is a very weird idea. So, I mean, any state can be governed by any constitution. I mean, you can be a constitutionalist and not like the constitution. I think the idea that to be pro-codification of the constitution is very sort of silly and abstract sort of position to have. But what she means quite clearly is that Western liberal democracy and English common law, those are the only ways to run any country. And she doesn't hear it that way in her own head. Generation where even the ANC spoke in terms of human rights. But nowadays, any young black person who hears that will hear, oh, you want black people in power, but they must rule like white people. They must have white laws. They must have a white constitution. That's what they hear. And so the DA, in more ways than one, is seen as the white party, not just because its leaders are white, but because it's the political culture that it's pushing is explicitly English liberalism. It's not, some kind of Africanized liberal perspective, it's English liberalism. And so everyone can see that for what it is. I mean, you hear all it, and generation believe in. And I mean, the thing is, they're not even catching up with their own youth wing. Because, I mean, if you're in university these days, you're a TA, student organization member, they're communists. All of them. You're not going to find like a Thatcher fan or like, amongst the DASO members. It's all like, well, we also agree that kind of actually, the land must go back and, we're very privileged. We shouldn't actually be speaking on this matter. And really, this kind of stuff where they'll bend over backwards to sound more woke than even the EFF are. And they're like, no, the EFF are the really, they're not pro-black enough. Sort of a silly kind of position like that. So I think...
I can't comment too much on the DA students. I haven't had really any interaction with them. But the one thing I will say about them is that if you look at a lot of these university environments and other youth-related environments, they've had the opportunity in those environments to be in opposition to a lot of these really toxic and dangerous ideas that have come to fruition on the campuses, and they just haven't. They've been completely spineless when it comes to standing up to these.
Yeah, they don't have what it takes. And the thing is that the older generation in the DA have to headhunt a lot for people who share their vision, because it's quite hard. Because a lot of the people that they automatically suck up are just people who intuitively don't like at a very sort of non-cognitive level know that the ANC and the EFF are not the way to go. But then the values that they push are basically, well, look, we govern better, but we'll give you what you want, kind of a vibe, which is not what their sort of upperclassmen party leaders really want. I mean, those guys are classic liberals. They want sort of like, well, let's make South Africa into another New Zealand or Australia or Canada, and that's not going to happen. You can't turn Africans into English liberals. Not unless kind of totalitarian, violent social revolution.
The Westminster system of government, the English system of government that is dominant in the Anglosphere. It helps that there's a cultural connection to that governance system. It was developed in connection to one another. Values bounce off one another and have changed both sides. And I think when you try and bring in a different government system on a different culture that isn't used to it, there's going to be problems there. They won't match too well. And actually, in large parts of Africa, not just South Africa, but in other parts of Africa, you actually do need almost some of these. I don't want to say you need almost decolonization of their governance systems. You need them actually to develop their own systems of government that can connect with their culture. So actually, I think if you do that, then actually you'll be able to. They might be able to start prospering. And I think an example you can maybe look at is actually Rwanda, because they do actually govern on a sort of Ubuntu system. I think I've seen you right before, and and they've actually started to prosper in many ways because they're sort of developing their own institutions that correlate to their culture. And I think that really is the way to go for not just South Africa, but large parts of Africa. But obviously the Cape is different in that regard because we've got a far more Western influenced culture than anywhere else on the continent.
Yeah, I think people want to know what that kind of constitution would look like. But the reality is that these people live under an international order, and so they have to at least give the external appearance of a liberal democracy. So, for example, you've got Rwanda, you've got parliamentary democracy, nothing remarkable about their constitution, except that what happens is that they're governed by a totalitarian party that wins 98, 99% of the vote in every election, and no one criticizes the leader. And it's very, very hard for you to do that in a Western country. You can't actually control that. Even Adolf Hitler didn't have that kind of control. And the reason for that is that you simply don't have the same kind of potent adherence and to the idea of unity and that kind of broad revulsion of any kind of division in society that you get in sort of African society. And there's different ways it works out. So like the Rwandans, obviously, they had a massive fracture in their society that forced them to weld things together in a very brutal way in order to erase the difference between Hutu and Tutsi. So we are all Rwandans now. We all agree there will be no difference. But another good example of how this works in practice very well would be, Botswana. And they, as much as they're supposedly a liberal democracy now, it's much like Japan, where you've got a liberal democracy now, but everyone just votes for the guy who's inherited that office from his father and from his father's father and from his father's father's father. And so you have these heritable positions, and the Khama family dominates the presidency, and it goes on because everyone sort of has an understanding that this is the chief, and the chief will sort things out, and they have a slower, more sort of painstaking way of working out their differences. And I wouldn't say they're populist in that kind of febrile, ridiculous way that Europeans can be, but their leaders tend to be more focused on trying to reflect ground level values. I think it helps that the country's really small, so people are forced to.
But smaller countries generally work better.
Yeah, no, that's true. Okay, it's not a hard and fast rule. Haiti's not doing great. Honduras is not doing great. El Salvador's not doing great. But there's
of course. But if you look at I think it's the top 10 countries with the highest HDI, for example, Human Development Index. They're all small countries. I think in the top 20, it's something like 15. Look, and there are some obvious reasons for that.
There's also a slight negative correlation between size and per capita income, which holds to be generally true as a trend, as the research indicates. So being a smaller country is on balance a good sort of gamble to make, provided that you're very, very careful how you conduct international relations. Because if you're a small country and you decide everyone can, go take a long jump off a short pier, then you will soon find that you are very, very easy to squish. So if you're a small country, you've got to play nice. But if you do play nice, you win big. So I think that's sort of the general equation there.
And I think there's also probably a correlation there, because I think if you look at some of the most successful small countries, New Zealand, Switzerland, even Denmark, I think Norway, they do actually have relatively strong market economies as well. So if you compare it with a country like Honduras, which I think has experimented with socialism, then that is also a factor. So I think really, obviously, I don't want to say there's a miracle solution, but I think the combination of maybe a more neutral foreign policy, market economies and small countries probably gives you the highest chance of success.
Yeah, just don't do obviously stupid things would probably be the number one bit of advice. And because when you look at how when small countries screw up, it's always like a very obviously bad idea. They decide, okay, we're going to nationalize our industries and tell all of the foreign governments to bugger off. Oh really? You're really going to try or you get them, or
But that's why I'm also
no.
I'm not a big look. I think for example, in independent Scotland, if it was governed correctly, could really do very well. But when you consider that the SNP would probably govern Scotland, I can just think that's going to be a disaster with them in charge. I
No,
mean,
they're going to
if
be
it was,
they're going to be like
you've
they're going to
probably
be
heard
like a
what's that going to
frozen
happen too.
Greece. They're going to be like frozen Greece, which is most of the roads, most of what you do find in Scotland, coincidentally. But they would be basically like a very frigid version of Greece. Terrible, terrible, terrible. Because I mean, their current account deficit would just blow up overnight. The one thing that I think this connects to, which would be the punchline theme for tonight, would be Cape independence. And that is, how does all of this impact our little sort of passion at the moment?
Well, I think, look, if you look at going back to the polls, because obviously that was the main focus of the discussion tonight. I think if you look at the polls, all of the results will likely be a chaotic result. I mean, it's either an ANC EFF coalition, and that's clear, and it's obvious that you're going to get that. And I think that's the likely outcome if you look at both the IPSOS poll and the midpoint between the two polls. I think it's that's the likely outcome more than anything else. However, if the report poll is more on the correct side, then we're just going to have chaos in my view. I mean, there's obviously no pathway to a coalition, and that's going to be destabilizing.
Well, no, there is one coalition that's big enough. There is one coalition that's big enough in that case.
Well, two. The ANC DA coalition and the DA-led coalition backed by the EFF, if that came to fruition.
Right.
So those are the two that would be most likely, and both are bad for Cape independence at the end of the day.
Oh, yeah,
because if you look at that parliament, even if you support devolution, that's not going to get through the parliament. You might be able to lobby some ministers and maybe get some slight changes made. But if you really want a federal South Africa, if you really want some big changes, that's not going to happen based on these election results, unfortunately. And look, and here's the thing: if the report poll is correct, it's going to be a chaotic result, and I think it's going to be clear that the Cape should secede. But the problem is, because the ANC will be so low and the ANC and EFF will be below 50%, I think in the public size, there's going to be so much hope and optimism that you can actually beat the ANC, that people are going to put all their eggs in that one basket, and they're really just going to put everything on the line for that. And there won't be any plans, plan B put in place. And that's that's my concern, is that I think it's still quite clear that we're going to be facing quite a concerning result. But if it seems likely that both parties will be under 50%, then people won't prepare for another option.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of my problem, is that in the short term it's going to look like a really good thing. I mean, the ANC are defeated at last. Screw them, footsack ANC. But I mean, there's a sort of bitter note at the end of that where I kind of go, well, what does the country look like after the ANC? And it doesn't. I don't think that any of the problems can really be deeply solved. I mean, you've got the same permanent oligarchy that we've had since 1920. Okay, the country's still dominated by Rothschild, Oppenheimer, and Rupert. It's still, to a lesser extent, you've got your Beckers of this world, and you've got your Motsepes, so it's getting a bit more, variegated. But it's the same little families that have basically been pulling the heft of the economy along. Although they're mostly rent-seeking, not so much producing much. But what else is going to change? I mean, the demographics are not going to change. Okay, what those demographics want is not going to change. You've got the new cohort of people moving into the ruling class now. I'm talking about all the people who were in university, all the people who've passed through university in South Africa, who've got any career options ahead of them in politics. To call them communists would be, that would be an understatement. These people are rabid National Socialists, and I mean that in the very German sense of the word. My entire cohort at university, not only at UCT, but at the lesser universities, it's everywhere. They were all on the same page when fallism came running through. And this is like, okay, the land goes to the black people, all of white people's property. That's the moderate position. The moderate position amongst my generation of educated people is return the land. So that's the dispossession of all farmers, the nationalization of all commercial properties and so on. That's the moderate position. The radical position is, okay, we confiscate all of your liquid and movable wealth as well. And I mean, now we're heading into sort of Nazi Germany territory, So that's the moderate position, and you start to see it coming up. And not in small figures either. I mean, you've got prominent lawyers like Tembeka Ngcuka and Toby. You've got and Dali Mpofu. His son, who, I mean, strangely half white, still wants to go this, or the whole hog. I've never met a guy who managed to make sort of National Socialism sound quite as boring as that, but Sizwe Mpofu Walsh does manage to make it so. But
bizarre ideology of free speech.
Yeah, it's like, well, it's like, oh, that radical, bizarre, evil ideology that people can actually say what they mean in public. I mean, how dare they? But he's, these people are not alone. I mean, you look at Lindiwe Sisulu, and I go back to the whole question of the rule of law and the constitution. They're like, no. This is we have to go back to the Ubuntu ideas. We have to have a constitution that reflects African values and African political culture. And this is one of the things that people neglect to sort of see, is that, look, African political culture works wonderfully when you've got it actually attached to the roots the culture comes from, because then they've got institutions and protocols for dealing with things. When it comes into contact with the Western party politics system, there's no sort of anchor that gives people a method for delicately dealing with some of these issues, because party politics is inherently divisive. And a political culture that doesn't tolerate division or diversity of opinion, cannot survive when it is constantly disrupted by divisions. I mean, look, if you look back at if you read any sort of traditional sort of account of how things are dealt with traditionally, it's, we do not say divisive things. We slowly and carefully log our complaints and our suggestions in a certain protocol in public meetings. And when all voices are heard, then a careful consensus position is come to. And this has been something that people have delicately worked out over centuries. And the arrival of Western liberal democracy and Marxism has smashed this apart and left behind sense for the need for unity. And you can see this in the ANC itself, highly fractious. But when they talk to outsiders, that we are no factions, we are one. It does not matter how much anybody has stolen. We are one, and you are not in one. And it's a difficult thing, because we are now seeing the urbanization of South Africa.
And when you look at
so we're going to see big changes.
If you look at any media columnist in the country as well, I mean, their worldview seems to closely relate to Ubuntu as well, because their solution to all of South Africa's problems is a very simple solution, I'd grant you that, which is just, why don't we all just come together and find a solution, like work together, put aside our differences and just come together and find a solution. I mean, that it strongly relates to that.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, like, the way that people criticize it, if you actually read proper black nationalist thinkers, is you get there's a particular criticism that idea of Ubuntu that's just sort of like kumbaya, hold hands, is Desmond Tutu's corruption of it through contact with Christianity. And then there's that old refrain that gets repeated where they came with their Bibles and saw us with our gold, and now they have the gold and we have the Bibles, that thing. So there's sort of an antipathy amongst educated Africans towards Christianity. And what I find really peculiar when I look at
that probably relates to the Marxism as well. Marxism.
Well, that's true. That's true. But I mean, like, I read, who was it I was reading? Jordan Gobane, actually quite an underrated thinker. If you can find a copy online of his essay, Conflict of Minds, fantastic stuff to read. I mean, really, really prophetic. I mean, he talks about this concept of the new African. And he doesn't just talk about it as simply a mechanism of urbanization and deracinization. He specifically mentions different contributing streams of African, South African economic and religious culture that have contributed. And he talks about how the missionaries have created a certain kind of Black Christian. The mines and the farms have created a sort of removed class of Black African. And he's writing in the 1970s. And he says that what we are seeing is these people are removed from their societies. And I mean, the traditional societies would kill people who converted to Christianity. Now, funnily enough, all of the chiefs are Christians. And then all of the urbanites are atheists. So it's like this conveyor belt into Western society, but like, 100 years behind the curve. So it's very interesting. But that particular move that he said, like, the new African is a new thing, and we will see him become the dominant cultural force. And people aren't thinking about this because they think of people in terms of, okay, there's Zulu, whatever. It counts. But that only counts close to the street. The second you're going to your Model C schools, those people are like, okay, well, my culture is like something interesting. I'm very proud of it. But does it really matter all that much? No, my skin is more important. And so then there's they're much more within an African context. They're kind of much more cosmopolitan. And so for them, it's a skin. And so you carry over some sense of the culture, but then also they've picked up a lot of the stuff that Marxist parties, and they've picked up a lot of the hedonistic qualities of liberal society. So that particular mix creates a very, very weird and unusual sort of culture. And I think people in the white community, in the commentary community and so on, they're not ready to accept that this different thing, this generation is coming through, and they feel deeply betrayed, and they feel like they've been sold down the river by the ANC, but their solution isn't to go back to the West. I mean, there's only so many people in this country who think like Phumlani Majosi or or like, the Man Patriot podcast or what have you. Dumodenga, there you go. There's like a tiny handful of people who think like that, and they're almost insignificant numerically. Generation, and they will be dominant because they came at the peak of the growth of South African population growth. So what happens when you have like a baby boom? That generation dominates the culture for the next several generations, right? Because they numerically outweigh all of their descendants. And in the UK, this boom was slightly delayed, so it's actually Tony Blair's generation. Rather than Margaret Thatcher's, for example. And so they dominated the culture of the UK. What we get here in South Africa is that it's really people who are sort of around my age, maybe a tiny bit older, who really dominate. It's not the people born after 94. It's the people born from like 1985-ish. That generation who are coming into power now, those people are radical as all hell. Extremely radical. And I think that the real thing we're facing is that the political class, because here's the thing, ordinary poor people, countryside people, they're not going to get into power. Who's going to get into power is those urban elites. They don't want anything to do with minorities, I'm sorry to say. So whatever we're seeing now is concerning.
It's definitely concerning seeing that happen. And obviously, look, I think the starting point for us when we look at changing that, the political, the culture of the political elite, if you can call it that, is by starting to challenge these the extremist ideas on the campuses. You actually have a movement, have an organization that can oppose that on the campuses. And I think once you start actually having some opposition, once you start having some ideological debate, once you actually start to put the idea of free, that bizarre ideology of free speech into university campuses, I think then we can maybe start changing the course of where South Africa, maybe, well, in particular the Cape, is going, and the sooner that's done, the better, and I think that's the situation we're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I think is the only real place, the only two places that I can see at the moment which are ready for an alternative sort of offering, and that's the Cape and KwaZulu. So I'm not even going to add the Natal anymore. Let's not even pretend that that's relevant. The Cape and KwaZulu, those are the only two places where there's an opening for like a new type of political movement that is not black nationalism. So you can have Zulu nationalism, or you could have Cape nationalism. Cape nationalism is always going to have, it's going to be slightly fractured. But I think people in the Cape have an idea of why it's different. We have an understanding of why we do things differently and how we do things differently from others. And, who's got a vested interest here? Who's got their heritage here? We know this, And
I think the
KwaZulu, it's the
distinction
same.
also is KwaZulu nationalism is probably more, ethnically focused, while Cape nationalism is far more civically focused. It's more of a civic form of nationalism, similar to many of the new concepts of, for example, British nationalism, espoused by parties like UKIP, which is very much based on values that are held loyal to those areas. For example, in the UK at the moment, the values that dominate are the values that in many ways are classically liberal values that are some of the core values of the UK, and that's formed a big part of their culture. But if you look at other parts of the world, like maybe Hungary or other countries, their nationalism is far more ethnically focused, and I think that maybe draws a bigger parallel to KwaZulu.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the UKIP party kind of recognised, and the people who supported Brexit recognised, is that mass immigration is the biggest threat to classic British liberalism, because, well, you can't have British liberalism without British people, because, well, there's a cultural aspect to your political formation that cannot be captured by simple legislation, and I think most people intuitively understand that, and the demographic change that the Western Cape is facing it's got a similar sort of flavor to it. We don't like having sort of ethnic rule. We don't like it here. I mean, people used to resist very, very hard. Beg your pardon. The Cape resisted as much as they possibly could what the Nationalist Party was pushing on them. I mean, but once the Cape franchise is gone, it's like what was there left to do? So I mean, of course, the Cape consistently voted Liberal all the way, right up until the end. There was a brief moment during the sort of rapid growth boom during the 1960s and so on, where everyone decided to vote Nationalist Party, even the English Liberals. But that's not. That's
an exception to the trend, really.
Yeah, I think the thing is that overall, the Cape has always tried to pull in a different direction, and I think what's really sad is that the Cape has also at the same time been the part of the country from which unionism has risen. This is where the union, the march of unionization began in the late 19th century. We elected Cecil Rhodes. That's who we decided was going to run our ship. And
you can maybe draw parallels to the European Union in that regard, especially considering I think it was after the Second World War. It was Churchill who was I think an advocate of the United States of Europe. I think there's always been a question of whether the UK would form part of that United States of Europe, but obviously the UK was the first country to leave the European Union, so you can maybe draw some parallels between those two.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, look. We talk about the national polls, but I mean, the real punchline here is what's going to happen in the Cape. And I think one of the things that we're facing is that in the last the DA got, what was it?
Between 53 and 54.
3%? Yeah, okay. So between 53 and 54. So, I mean, this is one of the things, is the DA's support is also declining and becoming more diffuse. So it's very bizarre. Like, people are just getting sick and tired of incumbent parties, whoever they are. No, they peaked much higher than that.
Well, look, I mean,
I
if
was
we look
sure
at,
they
I think,
cleared
the highest.
70.
No, they cleared 70 in Cape Town, but in the Western Cape overall, they got 60%
Oh, yeah, that's
at
right.
their peak. And they've dropped to about 58% in Cape Town now. However, that's also been, obviously other parties have gained from that. It's not necessarily black nationalist parties that have gained from that. However, it has been parties that at least are, rather corrupt, if you can call it, pretty much corrupt. Patriotic
That's
Alliance, good party, that have
Yeah.
unfortunately gained from that.
I mean, the Patriotic
But yeah,
Alliance
the
has been an
DA
extraordinary one
has
for
been
me.
on the decline since about 2016.
Yeah. No, I mean, the Patriotic Alliance has been an extraordinary one for me. I mean, they're transparently an ANC Trojan horse. I mean, Patricia de Lille is sitting in the cabinet, and she's so condescending about her people's intelligence. She comes down here to the Western Cape and says, "Oh, look, the DA and the ANC are in bed with one another. They have the same policies. They're not like playing on the fact that people do not know the difference between national spheres of government, and then and the fact that they don't know she's literally in the ANC's government, like as a coalition partner." It's the level of cynicism from that woman absolutely beggars belief. Anyone who works for the good party is beneath contempt. There's no values there, absolute snakes, but just purely there to damage the DA, and she's happy to do it for a pocket full of shekels and the privilege of spiting Helen Zille, which honestly. But I mean, her aside.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
what we've
look,
got on our side as people
I'll-
pushing
maybe
for
I
Cape
think-
independence is.
I think we probably should start rounding up, but I will end it up. I will end it
Hmm.
up with this. I mean, I think any political party that's really in the Western Cape, that's really putting themselves and their party interests and their national agendas before the lives and the people of the Cape, I think that's absolutely contemptible of them. And I'm talking in part about the DA as well, obviously, because they've had the opportunity to push federalism for the last 10 years in the Western Cape, and they've been pathetic at that job.
Yeah, they've done nothing. I mean, there's that. I mean, the last project that I did for AfriForum, which they still haven't published yet, but it's a book length report. It's in Microsoft Word. It's 99 pages. You've read it. It's just like this laundry list of all these little loopholes that you can exploit in the law to gain power over various institutions and things at a local or provincial level. And the DA has ticked not a single
box. It's not much,
box.
but it's something.
No, but
it's
really
not much, but
something.
it's something. At least it could look. It's not a substitute to federalism or independence, but it's at least something that can slow the decay in the Western Cape, the decline in the Western Cape. That's brought on us by the ANC. They could have done that, and they failed at that. And now they're failing again when it comes to the referendum legislation. I checked today. It's been 14 months since the DA said they're going to present this referendum legislation to Parliament, and they haven't done it yet. I mean, it is really contemptible what they're doing. And obviously, parties like Good and others, they're contemptible as well. But at least people know, the vast majority of people know that Good's a pretty dodgy party. I mean, that's why they only got about 3% of the vote. I mean, people don't seem to know that about the DA. And I think, slowly but surely, I mean, people are starting to realise how, how they put their party interests and the national agenda ahead of the Western Cape.
I think the real problem that we have right now is the number of independence parties are still very small. You've got the very incompetently run CIP, Cape Independence Party, the ones who are holding the flag, holding the great beacon for this movement, have done such a terrible job. And then you've got Vryheidsfront Plus, and you've got the Cape Coloured Congress. Now, the Cape Coloured Congress are very, very poorly run. And Vryheidsfront Plus, while they're very competent in many respects, and they work very well with others, they're very much, as a friend of mine said, they're a party of utopies. They're a gerontocracy to some extent, and so they don't have that. I mean, the guy said that they don't have the kind of vigor that's necessary.
I mean, look, I was at their youth summit, and it was quite a vibrant youth summit that they had. So I think there is definitely a lot of young energy in the party. But look, what I would say maybe is that the Freedom Front Plus is not necessarily the best party to appeal to the core DA base. I mean, look, I've got my Freedom Front Plus T-shirt on at the moment. We appeal far more to disaffected DA voters who are tired of the ideology of the DA, and more conservative orientated people, of which there's a sizable portion in both the Afrikaner population, the English population, and the coloured population, and they do have a big growth potential, I think, there, especially in the hinterland of the Western Cape. But you do need a party that can appeal to that core DA base. The CIP doesn't do that, unfortunately. The Freedom
Ideally,
Front Plus
what you'd have,
do that. And
indeed. Ideally, what you'd have is you'd have a reformed Cape Independence Party that ran under a leader that had sort of competent, decent policies that were minimal, non-divisive, just basically giving people what they need to. How should I put it? The lowest common denominator policy. So I mean, like, there's a thing that I
like
get from AfriForum a lot. Right. So you give them, okay, look, everybody who's on this in this area, there's certain things we all agree on. Let's not go for these divisive things on the end. Let's just say, okay, here's what we know everybody wants, which is not getting done. And here's this option that we have over here that we want you to believe in. We want you to believe in us and yourselves, and here's this thing, here's this vehicle. And, really have a go at hitting the streets in the right areas and talking to people and so on, and not getting into petty, ridiculous disputes over confusing little brand names like they did with Cape Exit. I mean, it's been embarrassing to watch.
It's just because, look, there's certain things that could be done in the Cape independence movement, which would just streamline things so much, which would just make the process so much more easier, which would really give us a massive boost going forward. But unfortunately, there are certain things that happen, and there are certain disagreements between egos that just really hinder that progress.
It's like the worst part is, like, if you're close enough to the movement and you can sort of see everyone sitting there, it's like all of the tools are sitting right there, except that you've got different people who don't like each other, each sitting on the different tools that you need, and they're not coming together to build this thing. And it's very frustrating. It's very frustrating, but, like, I don't know. I'm optimistic that we'll work something out by the end of the year.
We need a sense of consent. We need to be more like the ANC. We need to have consensus. That's what the Cape independence movement means.
Let's be more specific. We need to learn from traditional African culture in this regard, not from the ANC.
Embrace the essence of Ubuntu.
Indeed. And on that glorious and highly progressive and decolonial note, let's sign off, shall we? I think we all have little things to get to, and unfortunately, because of my tendency to ramble on a lot, I didn't leave time to do a whole bunch of questions. Although I usually do when I'm doing a stream by myself, so maybe next time. But thanks everyone for tuning in. It has been great fun, and I hope you all picked up something that you were happy to hear of. I hope it was insightful. Thanks, Robert, for coming on. Been a great help.
Yeah, we definitely need to do this soon.
All right then. Cheerio. Night night.